fan. Förbannelse. Och kaffe över hela brallan också. So this is a dirty old piece of wood, but it's actually fairly close to what you would find at the hardwood store if you're looking to buy, you know, just regular wood flooring. This is about 120 millimeters wide, and you have a tongue and groove. And if you take two of these and you put them together like this, and this is how you would make a floor. Now these in particular are made for siding, so let's just forget about that. But if we take and compare it to this, so this would be your wide plank flooring, and this is an even bigger piece. These are huge. And so we recently installed a floor just like this in our house, and this video is going to be just a few tips and tricks about that particular process. We set up a very simple workstation right outside our house. This is where I would cut each piece to length before I took it inside. For this entire job I basically just needed a miter saw and some small hand tools. But the miter saw was lacking a little bit, as roughly half of all of the planks were between 35 and 40 centimeters wide, which was just outside the reach of the saw. So a lot of the time I had to cut the last little bit with a handsaw. We bought way more than we actually needed, and this stack of wood was enough to cover our floors twice. And you'll see later in the video how we put all this wood to use, but we did find that it was really nice to have a big stack so that we could sort through and handpick each of the pieces based on its width, its taper, and its appearance. So let's just talk a little bit about the wood itself. So this is spruce. It comes from the Swedish forest, and believe it or not, this is what you would typically find in an old house prior to 1850. So in the olden days they would make their lumber by splitting it from a log. So they would find a tree that has very nice and straight grain, and they would split each plank from the log, and they would hew them with an axe and then finish them with a hand plane. And so naturally what you would have is a tapered board. So here you have the pith of the tree, and you can see the full spectrum of growth rings here. This makes this style of flooring unique in a few different ways. So first off, nowadays it's produced using modern equipment, but the old principles remain the same. Large diameter spruce and pine is harvested in the winter months and cut into full width slabs. It is air dried for a full season and later is made into flooring. And since these are true full-width planks, meaning each piece is positioned on the trimmer saw so that the cut follows just the live edge as it's being trimmed. This creates two straight sides, but the sides are not parallel. Instead, the whole plank is wedge-shaped. And this needs to be taken into consideration when installing the floor, as every other plank needs to be put opposite of each other, so that the root end is meeting up with the top end of the previous plank. If this is not done right, then you end up with a floor that fans out and get wider at one end. You can also see that a loose tenon is put in between each piece that fits into the milled groove on each side, and this is also different from standard tongue and groove flooring, where you have a fixed groove and a fixed tongue. It's similar but different. Each plank is screwed or nailed in one of the grooves, and the other side is held down by the loose tenon. And this allows each piece to individually move, as throughout the year the changes in relative humidity has an effect upon the wood. This house had a mixture of a bunch of things. It had some of the original flooring left. Some of it was ripped up, and some of it was in such bad condition that we wouldn't be able to use it anyway. So we knew we had to install new floors in this house. We didn't do that in our old house because all the floors were in great condition. And that was also spruce, a spruce floor.
Very, very typical of old houses in Sweden to have spruce flooring. And this house being built sometime in that time period where this type of floor was commonly used. It then of course made sense for us to also install this wide plank flooring, or as it's known in Swedish, Kilsågat Golv.
This house, like many others built in the same time period, with a fireplace and chimney in the center of the house, over a very long time the outside walls tend to sink a little bit. The result of that is that the original floor joists and the actual floor on top of that will become slanted towards the outer walls. Here you see me cut some small wedges from a scrap 2x4, and we used a lot of these because before we could install the new floors we had to level everything out as best we could. Another really important thing when installing any solid wood floor is to know your moisture content. I shot this video earlier today. It is now 3 months since we finished the floors, and you can see we are between 6 to 10% moisture content at the moment.
This is a Wagner moisture meter. It's a really good one, and you just poop and put it on the wood and it gives you a reading. So I made sure to check not all of the pieces, but most of them, because as we got further down the stack, I was worried that there might be some moisture still in the wood, deep within the stack. But everything was around 9%, I think. And you know, it was the middle of the summer, so if anything, we might expect some shrinkage moving into winter. And as you can see behind me, fall is just around the corner here. So in a few months, there'll be some nice cold dry air, and I would expect this lumber to shrink just a tiny amount. The opposite, however, if you put it in bone dry, I mean really super dry, and let's say you installed your floors during the winter and it's sitting at like 5-6%, and then you had a really humid summer, what would happen is they would expand, and I suppose that could create some buckling across the surface of the floor. But what you don't want to do is when you're laying down a floor like this and you're approaching your walls, the wall that's meeting up along the side of a board like this, you have to leave some space so that it can swell if it wants to. If you're butting up against the wall with the end grain, you don't have to worry about it, because as most of you guys know, wood doesn't shrink in its length. It only shrinks or expands across its width, and a tiny amount across its thickness. You know, you have to knock these together when you're installing them, and we weren't super picky. You know, if there was a gap of 1 or 2 millimeters, that was just fine. Sometimes they can be a little bit crooked, and if you really want a super nice tight fit, you might have to do some hand planing, and I did do that on some of the areas that I wanted to be tight. But overall, if there was a gap of 1 or 2 millimeters in between each plank, that's fine. They will probably open up just a tiny bit more, as I said, as we go into the winter months. But then comes summer and the wood expands, and that gap would close just a little bit.
Fia and I did this job together. It was the middle of summer, beautiful sunny days, high temperatures, and this summer we had no rain for about 5 or 6 weeks straight. And there we were, working as fast as we could to get this thing over with. Maybe under different circumstances we would have enjoyed this process a lot more, because renovating old houses has become kind of our thing, I suppose. But with everything else that's going on in our lives, our daughter is growing up so fast. The last thing we want to do during her first years is to live in a build site. And all that's going on with the woodworking business side of things. We worked really hard for some time to get this thing over with. so that we can enjoy all the other stuff we got going on that we are more passionate about.
So anyway, some really cool pieces of wood. It's a really awesome thing to have Swedish spruce. You know, this was the next big step up from dirt floors, really. They just put it directly on the floor joists, and that's typically how it was done. And here we are 250 years later, and still doing the same thing. And I just think that's a testament to spruce as a flooring material. You can walk into old houses and find this type of flooring that was installed in the 1800s, and you know, it's worn, but it's worn in a way that's more, you know, it gets polished, it gets beat up, it gets dented and compacted, and you have a patina on it that's very hard to replicate. So yeah, that's that. So now I gotta get out of here before the mosquitoes turn me into a bloodless being. I spilled most of my coffee too.